Now, in a change of programme, BBC Two pays tribute to playwright Dennis Potter, who died today.
I first saw television when I was in my late teens. It made my heart pound. Here was a medium of great power, of potentially wondrous delights that could slice through all the tedious hierarchies of the printed word and help to emancipate us from many of the stifling tyrannies of class and status and gutter press ignorance. We're privileged if we can work in this, the most entrancing of all the many palaces of variety. Switch on, tune in, and grow.
Dennis Potter devoted his life to television and made his finest television from the raw materials of his life. In a prolific career which lasted 3 decades, his work addressed an exceptionally wide range of subjects: betrayal, religion, politics, sexuality. But the themes which he mined most deeply often took him back to his childhood in the Forest of Dean.
When I grow up, I'm going to be the first man to live forever and ever. Because in my opinion, you don't have to die. Not unless you want to. And I ain't never going to want to. Not me. When I grow up, I'm going to leave the light on all night, I be. No matter bloody what. I'm going to have books. On shelves, mind. Shelves, just for books. When I grow up, I'm going to have an old tin of evaporated milk and an old tin of peaches, I be. I bloody be, mind. I bloody damn bugger well be. Oi, and I shall curse. Do you know, tell that what, when I grow up, everything will be all right. Won't it? Won't it, God, eh? Lows like me a bit, doesn't God?
I do believe that Dennis Potter is a completely singular talent in British television. In a curious way, he's emblematic of what is possible. His stories, in a way, are universal, but they are personal in a way that very few other people would dare to be. I remember showing Arthur Miller a copy of The Singing Detective, and he looked at it. He looked at it all. He devoured it. And he couldn't believe that anyone could get away with it, that anyone was allowed to put themselves on the screen and be paid and offer the public this vision of the world, which was both so powerful and so personal and so radical, and also so moving. I think Dennis is a one-off.
Below my window in Ross, when I'm working in Ross, for example, there now at this season the blossom is out in full now there in the west early. There's a plum tree. It looks like apple blossom, but it's white. And instead of saying, "Oh, that's nice blossom," you know, now the last week looking at it through the window when I'm writing, it is the whitest, frothiest, blossomest blossom that there ever could be, you know, and I can see it. And things are both more trivial than they ever were and more important than they ever were. And the difference between the trivial and the important doesn't seem to matter. But the nowness of everything is absolutely wondrous. And if people could see that, you know, there's no way of telling you. You have to experience it, you know. But the glory of it, if you like, the comfort of it, the reassurance, if not that I'm interested in reassuring people, you know, bugger that. The fact is that if you see the present tense, boy, do you see it, and boy, can you celebrate it, you know?
What he did there was to completely justify the sort of television he's been trying to do, and a lot of people have been aiming to do for the last 30 or 40 years, which is to make it central to the national agenda. And he made his concerns central to an enormous number of people, not only his concern about his own death, and his concern about England, about politics, about work, about the anger and so on. And I think one of the things that made it a binding event was the fact that he, in one sense, for the last time, completely justified what he sees as the reason for being on television in the first place.
If he'd worked in the theatre, he'd have been the Shaw of our day. He'd have been that substantial, you know. It remains a scandal that because you work in television, you are somehow downgraded. You don't belong in that high category of high art. Well, Dennis does, if anybody does.
Potter's first piece for television was a documentary, which examined the working-class mining community into which he had been born in 1935. Like much of his later work, it was highly personal.
Jane, I baptize thee in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost.
Jane is my daughter, and in a way this film is about her and about myself. For I brought her down from London, where she was born, to be christened in the Forest of Dean, where I grew up. It's a story of my discovery of things here to respect, and of my anxiety about the kind of Forest of Dean she will see as she grows older. That's Margaret, my wife, born here like myself. And my mother, proud of her first grandchild. And my father, who has spent most of his working life in the pits of the Forest of Dean. For the green forest has a deep black heart beneath its sudden hills, pushing up into slag heaps and grey little villages clustering around the coal. Soon, though, I went to the local grammar school in Coalford, and almost imperceptibly began to grow away from this tight and secure world. Doing homework like this boy in a crowded and noisy room helped fling up a growing but confused exasperation with those around me. I began to read with a gluttonous desperation, eager to discover new ideas and revel in insights and feelings I'd never dreamt of before. Everything I saw began to take on depressing and drab colors. The forest came to narrow and constrict itself around me. The fortress became a prison. Even at home, with my own parents, I felt a shamefaced irritation with the tempo of a pickle jar style of living.
I think everything was informed by a passionate view, which he may, the opposite of may also be there, you know. He was drawn to the church, but he found it problematic. He was drawn to his family, but in a sense he defied his father, and he defied him in a way on television as well, in a documentary, and that sense of betrayal he experienced personally, the betrayal in the schoolroom, which you see in much of his work, the betrayal in some ways of his own roots, he left the Forest of Dean and went to the big town. He was believed that he was wanted to be a Labour politician at one stage, but he despised the rhetoric of these politicians. He believed in television as a liberating, democratizing experience, in one which he believed in those very simple principles of, in a way of public service broadcasting, that everyone had a right to see something interesting.
And I thought then that this miserable pile of dull villages could not possibly be reconciled with great art, great thought, vital emotions, and classical music. Oh, I wanted to escape. I yearned to get away. Well, I was lucky. I did get away. By a process of examination and accident, I got to Oxford. And I was able to relax and spread myself in what seemed to be a far more fertile and richer world than the Forest of Dean.
Are there any other ways?
While still at Oxford, Potter was interviewed for a BBC programme about class. He later dramatised this experience, which he saw as another betrayal of his family and his background.
For example, Nigel Barton, son of a coal miner, seen here in his rooms at Oxford.
It doesn't look very tidy either, Nigel.
I feel I don't belong here. That's my trouble.
Well, where do you belong? At home?
Of course. No, I'm afraid I don't. Now, it hurts to say this, of course, but it's the truth. Back at home, in the village, in the workmen's club, with people I went to school with, well, I'm so much on the defensive, you see. They suspect me of making qualitative judgments about their environment, you understand, but it's not my wish to do so. Yet I even find my own father looking at me oddly sometimes, waiting to pounce on some remark, some expression in my face, watching me like a hawk. I don't feel at home in either place. I don't belong. It's a tightrope between two different worlds. And I'm walking it.
You're a bloody liar, Nigel.
Can you see
The Wednesday play was, how would you categorise it now? Social documentary drama, I suppose is what people would say if you wanted an instant phrase to cover it. Well, Dennis didn't write those sort of plays, not really. He wrote, he wasn't caught up with boring naturalism for a start. We looked for the I was going to say pretense of naturalism, perhaps that's not quite the right word. We wanted to create an area, an aura of naturalism, but the plays weren't naturalistic, not at all.
Ladies and gentlemen, polling day tomorrow. Tomorrow you have a chance to use your vote. It is perhaps the greatest privilege you possess. I ask you to use it.
Privilege? Privilege? It's polling day tomorrow. Vote, vote, vote for Nigel Barton.
No, I've just looked at that, which I haven't seen for many years. The original ending was all that, and at the end, he looked, as he was looking at the camera, and he said, so there you are, all you've got to do is put a cross on a ballot paper, and the best of British luck to you. And he did that. And they didn't like that. So that's what people saw.
Travelling to work on a Thursday morning, coming up to Victoria on the toast-track trains, one could walk the length of the train, and most of the people on the train were talking about the play they'd seen the night before. Now that doesn't happen anymore.
My advice to you is, give him a bit of the old come to Jesus. Try not to be too clever, eh?
I don't regard clever as a dirty word.
Rule 1, it's never clever to appear to be clever. Long words actually hurt people, you know that? Rule 2, speak slowly and clearly, as though to a bunch of malignant kids. Rule 3, keep it short, very short. Half-truths take less time than whole ones, old mate. And you've let your locks sprout a bit since October, haven't you? Get them cut, there's a good chap. Rolling Stones gather no votes.
What we had in the 60s and through the 70s was probably the most democratic period for the writing and production of drama in the history of the land. That was an explosion of the human imagination which made contact with the imagination of the audience, because that's all we're about. All writing is about is the writer's imagination making connection with the audience imagination. Everything in between is bullshit, and the less of it, the better. We want the shortest distance to the screen, and in that period we had it, and I think Dennis Potter was at the head of that campaign, asking the difficult questions, being dangerous, being challenging, being very funny as well, and being free of hypocrisy.
When I first came to television, it was about politics in the conventionally defined sense of the word, about current affairs, or that area of television. But that fell away from me much more so. I realized that it was still imagination and people's fantasies, people's wishes, people's pains, people's anguish that really was the stuff and substance of what we could write about. And television has that peculiar power when it is dealing with what people actually dread, think, want, are joyful about.
I remember when them blue curtains caught fire on Good Friday. I remember when the Irish League beat the Football League 2-0. bloody nothing.
I remember he asked for the ring back. Oh, Freddie, Freddie.
I do not remember being sexually assaulted by a man with spiky hair and eyes the color of phlegm when I was 10. I do not remember, no.
Moonlight on the highway, moonlight on the plain. Turn your light on my way through memory lane.
Before long, it became clear that the essence of Potter's work was its attempt to go deep into the inner lives of his characters and to unlock their darkest and most painful memories.
Shine upon each byway that leads me to home, a place where roses remember and folks forget me not. What else is worth dreaming of? From your silver skyway, smiling up above, the moonlight on the highway, please lead me to love.
Moonlight on the Highway, I suppose, was the first flowering or playing around with the collision of various themes which persist in Dennis's writing throughout. I mean, in terms of content, the nostalgic thing about pennies from heaven, that's to say, from dross comes gold. You know, this cheap music can be heavenly for some people in some contexts. That theme. The theme never confronted head-on in any particular piece of child abuse, which is there. And the therapeutic notion that there is a way of actually unconventionally and by rejecting doctors of finding freedom from your own afflictions.
I have to tell you that, because you are my friends, I have to tell you that I have slept with 136 women. Prostitutes!
Yes! You can't buy love! I know I'm wicked, but why is them? I know why you all turning away. Dance, everybody, dance!
Potter's own affliction had already had overwhelming effects on both his drama and his life. In his mid-20s, he suddenly developed the symptoms of an inherited illness, psoriatic arthropathy.
I was a Daily Herald reporter, and I was covering the Young Conservatives conference. And I thought, I do feel ill. Surely the speeches aren't that bad. You know, it was the usual sort of hard-faced, brash young idiots talking about what this country needs, you know, all that. And I was at the press table. I was feeling increasingly, suddenly very ill. And I found at the end of it that I couldn't actually get up, and my knee was suddenly like a football. And this was all those, the winter of 61, 62. And then after that, it's just like a jet plane coming in, 100%. If you saw the Scene Detective, the way that he looked in the first episode was actually less than the way that I looked.
Even bloody tears, oh, I'm sorry, the shame of this. Even tears, oozing bloody tears hurt the skin on my face and laugh, it hurts my jaw. God, talk about the book of Job, I'm a prisoner inside my own skin and bones, and
Librium, Valium, antidepressants, and barbiturate. Barbiturate, antidepressants, Valium, and Librium.
Ezekiel cried, dry bones. Ezekiel cried, dry bones. Ezekiel cried, dry bones. Now hear the word of the Lord. Ezekiel connected them, dry bones. Ezekiel connected them, dry bones. Ezekiel connected them, dry bones. Now hear the word of the Lord. when your toe bone connected to your foot bone connected to your heel bone connected to your ankle bone connected to your leg bone connected to your knee bone connected to your thigh bone connected to your hip bone connected to your back bone connected to your shoulder bone connected to your neck bone connected to your head bone. Now hear the word of the Lord. Them bones gonna walk around. Them bones gonna walk around. Now hear the word of the Lord.
Dennis Potter was virtually bedbound and housebound from his mid-20s, a very vibrant age for a young, ambitious, brilliant man, until his death. Now that is a very strong perspective. That's where he saw the world from. He saw the world from illness, physical limitation, very often a bed, and the absence of a great number of things that people take for granted. And of course that informed his work, and he turned in on himself, as we might say, and so on and so forth.
The winter 61, 62, I became ill for the first time and immobile. And I had either to give up my job, and I didn't have anything else to do, or become a television critic. I'd left the BBC to go and work on a newspaper, and mistakenly I thought I would be allowed to express a sort of socialism in the Daily Herald, which was a great mistake.
Top of the morning to you, Chris, me old China.
Said 29-year-old feature writer and father of two, John Chart.
You're at it early, for God's sake. It's not decent, you know.
Added 46-year-old Dublin-born showbiz correspondent Harold Gladdy with a cheerful grin.
Grinding away at this early hour. I'm a bit pushed. It's going to be bloody cold again.
Oh, it's monkey weather.
In those days, the cripples, the has-beens, the deadbeats, and those due for retirement were allowed to be television critics. I think it's changed slightly. We still get a lot of deadbeats, but not so many cripples.
Yes, the TV critic. All right. Last night's ITV play, Paper Roses, gave us about as true a picture of popular newspapers as a funfair distorting mirror shows of our own faces, full stop. Except that in a fairground, you have some hope of enjoying yourself, full stop, end par.
Even by the very early 70s, the body of work that was to his name and to his credit was phenomenal, I think, by the standards probably not of Shakespeare's output, but I'm not talking about thousands of quality, but the sheer amount that he turned out, someone who was ill, someone who was not mobile, but someone who was absolutely voracious in his determination to make his mark and to continue to do so. So within a very short time, he was head and shoulders conspicuous above many of his contemporaries as the force in television drama.
The typical Potter drama played with the naturalistic conventions of television and put his own creative process directly onto the screen. One of his recurrent metaphors was that of the visitation, the sudden arrival in quiet suburban homes of a mysterious stranger.
A man who thinks he's an angel. That's what it's all about. And how he loses his wings. That's what everything is about. Everything. Everywhere. Every time. Oh, of course it won't work.
Sorry.
The play won't work.
Oh.
Not that it matters very much, of course. Who cares whether it works or not? The play for today. Just for today. helps pass the time, something easy, something undemanding. Lasts just a bit longer than a bag of crisps and has the same sort of taste. Oh, well, let's get on with it. Let's bring the poor deluded sod in off the cold street. Only have a day's film anyway. Let's sit him down in somebody's living room, shall we? Sit him down on a hard-back chair and let him announce he's an angel. An angel?
Oh, I love angels.
Oh, how very nice of you. How very, very nice. Oh, what a lovely thing to say. How very decent of you. Oh, I'm touched, overcome, overwhelmed. It isn't very often that I come across people who genuinely feel that way about angels.
There's no way that you can get away from a strong religious undercurrent, midcurrent, top current in his work. Even his ostensibly non-religious work, even when it's just political, there's a sort of religiosity about the politics. I think there's a great spiritual thirst there in all his work. Also about his feeling that if God's around and he's not helping much. But he keeps talking about it. Either he's there or he's not there. But he doesn't ignore it.
I sometimes think the only meaningful sacrament is to gather in groups and be sick on the streets, because life is full of obscene absurdities. But the sense which we have and why they are obscene, the yearning we have that they should not be as they are. All right, maybe it's a form of escapism. Maybe it's a displacement upon some father figure. Maybe it's the ultimate evasion, but I don't think so. It doesn't feel like the ultimate evasion. It feels like a commitment which is in itself extremely demanding and extremely painful. But I am sure of this one thing, that there is no access to God without pain. I don't necessarily mean physical pain, but there is no access without some sense of horror or shock or nausea or guilt or rejection of what this world does to this flame of life.
If you are a nervous type out there, switch over or off for some calmer air. But you have to be smug or very frail to believe that no man has a horn or tail. Come on then, my lovely. Time for eaty-weeties. And we'll have a good snoop around the old homestead, huh? There then. Suck that down, my little girlie. Oh, you dirty little girl. You messy little missy. Daddy'll have to smack your body for you, won't he? Yes, he will. Daddy will have to smack your pretty little bum.
Old black magic has me in a spell.
One of these so-called visitation plays sparked yet another angry debate. The BBC's Director-General described Brimstone and Treacle as nauseating and banned it from being shown at the time of its production in 1976.
Tingle that I feel inside.
And then that elevator starts its ride.
Patricia. Patricia. Shall Daddy see them little boo-boos? Shall Daddy see them pretty little boo-boos? Yes!
I think Dennis's sense of that conceit, you know, of inverting the old pious tale of the angel who comes to do good in your house by making him a devil. Dennis, again, because he saw it so clearly, had no idea in advance of how monstrous and explosive it was to invoke taboos by writing a piece which was about taboos.
I'd been briefed that it was going to be an onslaught on my sensibilities and so on, because that was the kind of hype at the time. And I thought it was amazingly well done. It was totally unpornographic. There were all kinds of ways that situation could have been massaged for sleaze. And in fact, nowadays, it would be massaged for sleaze. It's very mild now in terms of its tastelessness, if that is what it is. But I think great art probably is tasteless. And I've got a feeling that Brimstone and Treacle will turn out to be the major work, the masterpiece in the end, because it's very economical, it's very well proportioned, it's very subtle about the problem of evil. And I think it also understands the enormous difficulty we all have in doing good, that we all long to do good, but we can't. It's out of our reach, really.
There are moments from Potter that I'll never forget, and I guess that's true of all of us who've seen his work over the years. Either because they're so offensive, so lacking in good taste, that you just want to cheer, or because they're so moving, so touching, so deep, and so basically simple that you want to cry.
He was an enormously compassionate and optimistic human being, really. Tremendously compassionate. There are no heroes and no villains in his pieces. Everybody's flawed, everybody has heroic moments, good moments, bad moments. That's part of the genius of his writing, that, you know, it's not simplistic melodrama with white hats and black hats. Everybody's many faceted. People's motives are good. Their good motives have bad consequences. There's always a surprise in Dennis's writing, and that's what life is like.
1976, by the way, is a definite annus mirabilis for Dennis, because we produced at the BBC 3 pieces of his which could not be more different in both their rattle and, at the other extreme, their decency. That's to say, Brimstone and Treacle, which at the time was perceived as a nasty, dirty, bannable piece, but which now I think people would look at, I would certainly look at as one of the major plays of ideas of that era, and a witty, positive, loving piece. Double Dare, which was the one I expected to be banned, which is an extraordinary conceit, really, about a writer with a block who gets himself out of the block by wooing an actress.
All I want to know is...
Yes?
The director of that commercial.
Fragile. Melt into a new mood with a Fragile bar.
I mean, yes. Did he say, did he explicitly say, look, I want you to simulate...
It was all so funny. We were falling apart.
In so many words, did he say, look, this bar, this chocolate is a penis?
That wasn't the word he used.
I mean, did he say, or did he assume, or...
All I had to do was to suck a bit off.
Listen a minute.
Martin, it was only chocolate. Martin.
Doesn't it matter what you act in?
Yes, up to a point.
That's what I intend to find out.
Find out what?
Up to what point?
It's a very tortured piece about identity and the intersection between, sexuality and sale. When does an actress become a whore? When does a whore become something quite different from what she thinks she's selling? That, and the two notions come together. It's a terrific thriller.
It was disturbing to be in, but all good art must be. And funnily enough, I was in the taxi. I said, what would Dennis's plays mean to you now? And he said, I think what he does is he puts down the fantasies of normal people. They wouldn't want it to be talked of or even known, he said, but he had the courage to do it. And for my money, he said, that's really something. And above all, he was never boring.
You don't know the young lady in question, do you? Well, it's impossible to explain. It's just not the sort of thing that you can put into words.
Oh, yes, it is.
Yes,
My baby said yes, yes. I'm glad she said yes, yes. Instead of no, no. Next Sunday. I didn't say Monday. It's gotta be Sunday. We're ready to go. So ta-ta, we're gonna go gaga. My baby loves gaga. She told me so. Yes, yes. My baby said yes, yes. I'm glad she said yes, yes. Instead of no, no.
Did you get your hand up her skirt off?
Yeah, what a bit of the other on the back seat, eh?
Nice big tits, has she, mate?
From the first transmission, I think Pennies was recognised as and it's a much overused word, but was recognised as a masterpiece. It was seen as something that brought together many of Potter's concerns, many of his personal anguishes, and also his personal optimism, and put them into a form across 6 90-minute films that was popular, that could reach really quite a wide audience, but was very intense, very achieved, and was groundbreaking, was doing something with the form of television that had really never been done before.
Renoir, the filmmaker, always used to say, a man tells only one story. All his life, all my films have been one story. And Dennis's music, and the 30s music specifically, have been his stock and trade. And it's clear why, because it expresses that foolish aspiration and exposes the huge gap between the reality and the dream. You know, it's not always, the moon doesn't always shine in June, as we all know. And that's what affects him, and it becomes affecting in his work.
And they lived happily ever after.
Please, miss.
Yes?
How about them twins, miss?
What about them?
Her went hard, miss.
Damn you!
Love is good for anything that ails you. Baby, there is nothing love can't do. Love is good for anything that ails you. How's about a sweet romance or two?
There was about Pennies from Heaven in particular kind of joy and explosiveness, because it coincided with Dennis, the writing of it coincided with Dennis being on the drug methotrexate for the first time. A drug which now sounds ominous to describe what this drug was. This was an experimental drug prepared for the relief of cancer sufferers in their last stages. And Dennis was invited by an eccentric doctor to come onto the control panel at his own risk. He took that risk, and it almost immediately, made him a new person. From a cripple who lived in cellophane, because the previous steroids involved this extraordinary encasing yourself once a week in, some monstrous kind of covering, he became someone who ran, jumped and skipped along the streets of London.
the character he presented me with in Blue Remembers Hills was so accurate that I felt immediately comfortable in it. And my own experience of childhood flooded in through the open gates that he'd provided for me. I'll give you an example. In the violence scene when the two boys fought, I remembered immediately, as this happened, unrehearsed, I remembered watching it, that I wet myself as a kid when I watched violent fights. So immediately my hand went to my willy. And here's me, a 42-year-old, short trousers, but immediately I was there. And afterwards, hundreds of people, literally hundreds of people, wrote to me and said, how did you remember that? And I wrote back and said, I didn't remember it. It happened because I was 7 years old. And Potter had created the opportunity for me to be 7 years old again.
Into my heart, an air that kills from yon far country blows. What are those blue remembered hills? What spires? What farms are those? That is the land of lost content. I see it shining plain, the happy highways where I went and cannot come again.
I think he had more affection for his characters in Blue Remembered Hills than he had in any other of the plays I've seen. And I never felt that we were beasts. I felt we were souls. I mean, I don't understand, but human souls struggling to emerge out of appetite and anger and all the rest of human fleshly frailties.
Oh, he's a morbid creature, exclamation mark. Oh, he's a morbid creature, and he thinks I'm going back to him.
What's him doing? No. What's him doing to our mum? What do we think we're doing? Mum! I mean, how long does it take?
It's been a bit of fun, isn't it?
Rain it falls, the sun it shines, the wind blows, and that's what it's like. We are buffeted by this and by that, and it's got nothing to do with you. Someone you love leaves or dies. You get ill or you get better. You grow old and you remember, or you forget. And all the time, everywhere, there's this canopy stretching over you.
What canopy?
Things as they are. Fate.
The Singing Detective is a detective story about a man trying to understand himself, and we all go on that journey with that man. And the man happens to be not quite Dennis, but a man imprisoned in his body, as Dennis was, with psoriasis, and trying to make sense of the world and of himself and his part in it.
In dramatic terms, it needed exactly that starting point of extreme crisis and no belief, nothing, except pain and a cry and a hate, out of which were assembled the fantasies, and the fantasies became facts, and the facts were memories, and the memories became fantasies, and the fantasies became realities, and all of them became him, and all of them allowed him to walk.
The story is, as Dennis said again in that Without Walls, it's a man takes up his bed and walks. It's also the only example, I think, in Dennis's work where a character is more full and more healed and more available to himself at the end than he is at the beginning. And how powerful that is, I learned when there was a complete retrospective of Dennis's work in New York at the beginning of 1991. And I was programming that. And I had to program clips from the work every night. I'm sorry.
Stand up.
What?
You can. You can do it.
Think so?
Now or never.
Now or never.
Hey, wait. Just want to make sure these wheels are safely locked. Don't want you skittering all over the floor. That would be rather untidy. Right. Go ahead.
Into each life some rain must fall.
Metaphysics.
Music.
Into each life some rain must fall, but too much is falling in mine. Into each heart some tears must fall, but someday the sun will shine. Some folks can lose the blues in their hearts, but when I think of you, another shower starts.
Dennis was devastated to see this clip on a large screen in a theatre in New York, because he said to me he hadn't thought about The Singing Detective since it went out 4 years before. He had no idea what he'd done in terms of something which had devastated him when he saw just that little extract from it. And he got up on that stage and couldn't speak for 15 minutes. And I was also on stage that evening. I and the other guest had to just bask while Dennis went into some trauma. So the thing about The Singing Detective is that even its creator not even, maybe especially its creator, had no idea what he'd done until it was realised, until it was fulfilled.
I think one of the things that happened towards the end of Potter's career is he began to be too much indulged by the medium. He really needed to interact with the visual people and the people who understood the pace of a programme. And that began to go wrong, I think, with Black Eyes.
Never thought I'd fall, but now I hear love call.
Whisper. Whisper. Whisper to the most primitive part of the brain. Listen. Oh, God, yes, I admit it. She began like this. As plastic, as dead, and as demeaning as any standard male fantasy.
I'm getting sentimental over you.
The first episode of Black Eyes was a work of genius. It was wonderful. And then it all lost its coherence and its momentum and fizzled out. Because he hadn't actually thought about all of that. That it takes a programming intelligence to do that. And he is actually a poet of the medium and not a strategist.
Black Eyes was much misunderstood. For the first time in his life, he was bitterly upset by the accusations that he was a misogynist and so on. People have always misunderstood Dennis's work. The sort of moral panic brigade. You get the feeling that what they're responding to is the fact that he's making them think about themselves and pointing out bits of themselves that they don't actually want to face.
That's it. Dream your pretty little dream.
Sway, sway and say, look at me, look at me. But all the while, she's trying not to look into her own head.
But the other thing that Potter did in that was he drew people in. He used their own voyeurism and then would go to the next frame that made the implicit criticism of it, that this was lethal, this stuff that they were doing, treating people as things. That A, they couldn't help it, and B, it was tragic in itself. There's no point in being outraged by Dennis Potter. You have to listen to what he's saying. It's the truth that's outrageous, not Dennis Potter.
He was always attracted by the dark parts of the forest, by sex, by childhood, by the sense of rage at the way our society has corrupted itself, or has allowed itself to be corrupted.
Only connect, said E.M. Foster, that great novelist whom Murdoch's nasty little rag would presumably dismiss as an artsy-fartsy old pufter. But yes, what a good word. Connect. Connect. The verb which far better than the merely technical transmit is, if not actually, certainly what should be the defining activity of all television, especially that threatened and peculiarly self-threatened section, which has no need, and indeed no remit, to package up A, B, or C defined groups of the allegedly passive on behalf of predatory advertisers. The section of broadcasting which, above all else, and quite separately from any temporarily dominant political language or so-called management culture, must continually remind itself that it is not a business trying to distribute dosh to its shareholders, not owned by its current administrators, not a company entitled to build Chinese walls around its momentary practices, but something held in trust and in law for every citizen of this misgoverned and too long abused group of nations we for probably a few decades more call Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
That MacTaggart lecture was a man describing through the symbol of the BBC a sense of how he'd come to realise at the age of 58, 59, whatever he was when he did that, that all his ideals, all his hopes for the country that he loved very deeply were not going to be realised, and in fact were going backwards. And I think he saw the BBC as a symbol of the direction that the country had taken, which he found profoundly depressing.
One way to judge how we're doing as a country is the writers we turn up. And we turn up different sorts of writers, and when you look back, they're the same sorts, reborn for different times. And we always need about half a dozen different types, and one writer we always need is a George Orwell. And I think that using television and being a dramatist, neither of which, of course, Orwell did, Potter fulfilled that function for a significant time. And I think that's why he got the affection, because people just respect that basic, cussed, individual, independent, English decency, anti-authoritarian, anti a hell of a lot of things, but for decency, really. And I think that's in a way why he made such a mark on the minds of people who often didn't like his work particularly, but kind of knew that it stood for something that they, in the end, would fall in behind.
In his last interview for television, Dennis Potter made an appeal for the BBC and Channel 4 to collaborate on the production of the two final scripts he was rushing to finish, Karaoke and Cold Lazarus.
The thing that struck me very much about Dennis in his last days was the extraordinary complexity and determination of purpose, you know, to think, I will go on doing this, I have defined this, I want this to happen, I want these people to be in things, and really to order the world, you know, from, as I say, beyond the grave, and to perpetuate, well, it's not too much, it's not laughable to say his Christ role model, because I always felt that Dennis spent much of his life trying to walk on water, and for a great deal of his life succeeded in doing so, both in the quality of his work and in it's that combination of being manipulator, impresario, and control freak. You know, all of those things which came together, sometimes in devastatingly positive mode, sometimes in ways which were rather cruel and manipulative in the bad sense. But mostly were pro bono publico, I suppose one would say, given that Dennis's definition of public and friends was a very narrow but loyal one.
I think that his need to, in the last days and weeks that he had, to put on paper Karaoke and Cold Lazarus, and for them to be meaningful, to explain, not just to explain himself to people, but to bring to life the themes and ideas that he'd had, was very important. I think we will try to ensure that they can be brought to the screen in a way that you know, is a fitting memorial to him.
My only regret is to die 4 pages too soon, you know. If I can finish, then I'm quite happy to go. I don't mind, you know. I'm quite serene. I haven't had a single moment of terror since they told me. I know I'm going to die, whether it's in 4 weeks' time, 5 weeks' time, 6 weeks' time. It might be longer. I might make 8, 9, 10, who knows? But the histology of it suggests that I should already be dead. But I know what's keeping me going. And if that passion, if those two organizations could do this, then I would have left something that, in the first case, I am proud of, because I've written so much of it I know, and I've got the same feeling that I had with Singing Detective and Pennies from Heaven, only even more so, and Blue Remembered Hills, that I would go out with I can now be arrogant and boastful and F it to everything. I could go out with a fitting memorial.
Cheers, Pop. Bye, everybody.
See ya. Bye. Cheerio.
Bye.
Good luck. Keep your noses clean.
Let's say goodbye with a smile, dear, just for a while, dear, we must part. Don't let this parting upset you, I'll not forget you, sweetheart. We'll meet again, don't know where, don't know when, but I know we'll meet again some sunny day. Keep smiling through, just like you always do, till the blue skies chase those dark clouds far away. And I will just say hello to the folks that you know, tell them you won't be long. They'll be happy to know that as I saw you go, you were singing this song. We'll meet again, don't know where, don't know when, but I know we'll meet again some sunny day.
And with that tribute to Dennis Potter, who died today, tonight's episode of Quantum Leap has been postponed until next Tuesday at 9 o'clock here on BBC Two.